Vijay, if I complicate this argument, I mean, it again depends on how you look at it. I mean, if as a person of color who has been in the United Kingdom for a long time, now you've moved based to Paris. From the race standpoint, from the argument of race standpoint, how do you look at it? I mean, there are still cases. He mentioned the EPL. We see cases of discrimination. We see cases coming, almost every couple of months. Ultimately, one of these sports events or these mega events, the larger ideal of society is coming together for a larger cause. Is it then the Olympic caravan? I mean, the cynical argument that the caravan comes to town and leaves with it, with all the money, etc., and people are left to fend for themselves. How do you look at it? I mean, I'm an optimist. I support mega events because I think they bring real change, real transformation. Look at Barcelona. I mean, the city is what it is today because of the 92 games. How would you analyze London?
Yeah, I think London was always multicultural. I think it still remains multicultural. I mean, you have an immigrant son as the mayor. I mean, what more do you want? In fact, politically, London is coming under fire of being too multicultural, so that it's lost its identity of what it originally was. And of course, London has always been historically multicultural and will always remain. I think the multiculturalism in London is growing to an extent where anything national is not remaining anymore. And I spoke to the taxi driver who was of Turkish descent yesterday, but born in London. And he told me how his father came at the 1966 football game, World Cup, and stayed back, never went back. That's where this person was born. And he said how it was to live in East End and how things have transformed. How his son, and how his son is now going to be a medical doctor. So you see, from a person who ran away from Turkey to watch the football games, worked very hard, his son takes over as taxi driver, and now the grandson becomes a doctor in one of the London hospitals. So things can change. There are opportunities. However, that said, it's all about how much opportunities are created by society, by governments, how much of education comes into play. All of these factors, socioeconomic factors, obviously come. And sport is a big event. It can change people's lives, as we have seen. And it's happened with a few examples in London.
Professor Lekha, when I was in Oxford as a student between 99 and 03, I used to be scared of going to the East End. I mean, then I've seen Canary Wharf completely change. I mean, now my brother-in-law works in one of the leading banks there. I mean, the whole discourse over East End has changed. So there is real change. But tell me something, is sport still more important and business feeds of it? Or is sport now big business and sport is just that little remnant where people like you and me, Vijay, academics, try to bring in the spirit argument, the legacy argument, but we will always be marginal?
I think sport can absolutely bring momentum. So there's no doubt that the Olympics drove the commercialization that followed and the regeneration within this area. So as soon as the decision was made, which I think was maybe 7-8 years in advance of when the Olympics actually occurred here, regeneration began. That included huge train lines, infrastructure, hotels, everything. But then, of course, after the Olympic Games, where I think you look at other events, it can then decline and it can spiral, particularly if you've built Olympic villages on the outskirts of a city where you're then not able to drive the crowds there anymore. So I think having a Westfield shopping centre was particularly clever move because you're still then driving people and driving traffic into those areas. And the second one, which is controversial depending on who you speak to, of course, I think from the organisers, they wanted the Olympic Stadium to remain as the national home of athletics. But of course, they would argue it was too big. Yes, it can host the Olympic finals, but it's not going to host a weekly running circuit. It's far too big. It's 80,000 people. So you then had a situation where athletics had to really find a partner, a suitable partner that could take on the Olympic Stadium, and when they needed to use it, yes, it was available, but actually that's where then amateur sport had to turn to professional sport and find then the suitable partner, which is why it's now transformed into, as we mentioned earlier, West Ham United's football ground. And they are able to drive crowds on a weekly basis into the area, which of course then continues the momentum, continues people using the infrastructure and the trains and the shopping and the hotels. But of course, you take that away, would amateur sport be able to maintain that presence in the area? Definitely not to the extent that professional sport has allowed it to.
Vijay, last question to you. I mean, so 10 years down the line, if I look back at London, will I say that it's a triumph of big commercial professional sport and amateur sport as always, or the narrative which has forever been marginal, people's participation compared to the whole commercial, humongous success of commercial sport, that takes precedence, that eventually it's the success of big business rather than sport for sport's sake, the spirit of sport's sake? Is that the truth then? That the subaltern remains the subaltern?
Yeah, absolutely. Business is so big, Boria. Money talks always. It's about money, it's about business. But in that process, it's like Adam Smith's invisible hand in economics. The businessman will want profit, will want brand equity, will want everything. But in that process, Boria, what Adam Smith, the economist, talks about is the invisible hand. Employment comes in. Goods are there. Somebody gets inspired down the way. So, yes, business is there for greed, and sometimes greed is good because in the process, the invisible hand comes into play, and in that process, some good happens. It's just like globalization as well. Some win, the majority win, and in that process, some do not. But overall, the picture is we need business for sport, and however we look at it, business will always be big, with sport small, but sport will still gain.
Interesting. Sport will still gain, says Vijay Pereira. Again, if I have to sum it up, I mean, both my experts have added to the complexity of this whole maze. I mean, there is no simple straight line to understand legacy. Never was, never will be. And we academics, we tend to make things complicated. That's our job. That's why we write books. So we will continue to do that. But this whole business of sport argument, that how do we analyze London 10 years down the line, has been a very productive and interesting conversation with Professor Lekar and Professor Pereira. I hope you guys have enjoyed, because some very important strands have come through in these conversations, the 2 episodes that we've been able to do. Plenty more coming with Professor Lekar. Professor Lekar, we've got to get you more involved in our journal circuit, in the Sport and Society conference curricula as well, because there's plenty more that we need to learn from you and get your expertise for. Vijay, always a pleasure to talk to you. Many more to come. And our large conference in Paris, the big conference, the overarching Paris 2024 one will happen. The workshop in 23 and the conference in 24. For the moment, on behalf of everyone in Sport and Society and my 2 guests, Vijay Pereira and Benjamin Baker, thank you very much for watching.